Hello, and a warm welcome to everyone joining us today. Before we begin, and since we are at the EU House in Riga, just wanted to start out by paying our respects to the European Parliament President David Sassoli, who passed away today. So, an incredibly well-regarded, respected politician there at the European Parliament. So, on a sad note, we're beginning this. My name is Edijs Bošs. I'll be your moderator for this online event, which is titled Eurozone Perspectives, Economic Challenges of 2022. This is intended to be a conversation, a rather swift Q&A session, because we have just 1 hour at our disposal. We need to be out of here at 3 o'clock. And we have here the governor of the Bank of Latvia, Mārtiņš, Kazāks, and someone who is visiting Riga today, the finance minister of Ireland and the current president of the Eurogroup, Paschal Donohoe. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Hello.
Great to have you here today. So, this is an online event which is being broadcast on various platforms, which is cool on the one hand, but not so cool on the other hand, because the platforms are so numerous, I actually don't have any clue whether anyone is listening to us. But in case we do have an audience, dear friends, this is how you can get through to us and how you can participate in this Q&A session. We really look forward to your questions and comments. So log on to Slido. The passcode is 1101. So in this time of pandemic, we're very used to all of these technologies, so I'm absolutely sure you're familiar with Slido. Just log on to Slido, passcode 1101, and first questions are actually coming in already. So please do keep that up. Don't leave the entire hour just to myself. This is intended as a conversation with an audience. So, and by the way, dear friends, it's not so often you have the opportunity to engage in a conversation with an Irishman or a Eurogroup president, you know, so please do use the opportunity. Before we begin, a couple of words on the Eurogroup. This is entirely unnecessary for the specialist segment of our audience, but nevertheless, the main task of the Eurogroup is to ensure close coordination of economic policies among the Euro area member states. The Eurogroup meets at the level of finance ministers. The Eurogroup president is elected for a 2.5-year term, if I'm not mistaken, and Mr. Donohoe has been in that role for 1.5 years, so a year to go still. Mr. Donohoe, I have to admit I learned something new today. On your website and elsewhere, there are 2 letters behind your name and your surname. So it's a 2-letter abbreviation TD, and I wasn't familiar with that. I was thinking it's maybe your academic title, or maybe your marital status, or your vaccination status. Who knows these days? But then Google search sort of helped me, and it means you're an elected member of the Irish Parliament. Very good. In English language. Yeah, I tried, to pronounce it. It's not that easy, but it sounds beautiful. So we figured out what TD stands for. First puzzle solved. My opening question to both of you, and we'll begin with our guest today, and it's directly related to our title, which is Eurozone Perspectives, Economic Challenges for this year. So I guess it all has something to do with ensuring that the post-pandemic economic recovery, continues and isn't affected by anything bad, right? That's all what we're all hoping, and that must be on your agenda for this year.
Well, I'd see it slightly different at this point, and it's fantastic to be here, and thank you very much for this event, and it's a great honour to be here with the Governor of your central bank and have the opportunity to answer your questions. The reason why I would see it slightly differently is I think it's a bit too early to say that we're in the post-pandemic phase. I would love to describe it like that, I hope we will be at a point soon where we can say that we are in the post-pandemic phase. But for now, where we are is putting our fiscal policy with the support of the work of the European Central Bank in encouraging a recovery that developed strongly across last year and maintaining the momentum of that growth into 2022, when we are dealing with challenges such as Omicron, a new variant of COVID-19, as you and your viewers will well know. But the additional challenge is it's so important as we are guiding our way to this recovery that we try to deliver a recovery that is different to the economic reality that we dealt with before this pandemic arrived. And this is why the Recovery Fund is so important and why a higher awareness of a digital transition and a transition to a lower carbon future are really important areas of difference versus where we would have been a number of years ago in our thinking of what a recovery needs to look like.
In your view, are we on the right track in terms of having all the instruments in place that need to be in place? We do not know yet when we're going to reach the post-pandemic phase, but hopefully it is approaching. So for the next year, for this year, is there something urgent that still needs to be done, or the instruments are there, they need to be implemented?
So the instruments are there, and it's regarding how we make the most effective use of those instruments. And maybe to make your analogy musical, if I may, to think of them as musical instruments, it's the way we play them, it's how high, what's the volume of their performance. So the two instruments in particular that I would pick out would be how we implement budgetary policy for 22 and indeed for 2023, where we have agreed the need for a supportive budgetary policy to continue to aid in a recovery, but it is now a moderately supportive budgetary policy, so a lower level of deficit versus where we were last year. And then the second important instrument is a far newer one, which is, of course, the Recovery Fund, which I know for your economy will be around 1.8 billion euro worth of grant funding, with the capacity to add an additional 2 points of growth to the performance of your economy. And that's a very new fiscal instrument. So we need to take great care regarding how that is used. But its existence is a really big difference to where we would have been in the pre-pandemic era.
I will involve the governor in this conversation as well, but just another follow-up, and I'm quite sure our audience is going to pick up on a number of points that you made already. But I was wondering, in your capacity as Eurogroup president, you sort of have your hand on the pulse of all the various countries and how they are implementing the instruments and how they're making them work. And obviously, you cannot really compare who's doing well and not so well, but at least you might give us a hint of where the best practices, where the things are moving along the best, you could say. Can you?
Sure. So it's probably a little early at this point to honestly answer your question and to be able to identify what country is doing very well in the execution of their recovery plan, as we're really at the very start of the execution period. The two things that do strike me as being really interesting, though, is firstly the consistency of thinking across the European Union regarding how this fund should be used. So the consistent focus, for example, on a digital transition, something that's already a strength of your economy, how you want to make it a bigger strength, but how other countries want to make it develop that quality in their economy. And then the second thing is what this will mean then for the operation of the European Union itself, the impact it will have on the role of the Commission, the role then of ministers in being able to communicate how they're communicating the plan in their country to their colleagues, and to be able to deal with the perspectives and views of the Commission on how the plan is being implemented. So I think the informal architecture of the European Union, as is frequently the case when we have a crisis, has begun to incrementally change again as we have a new fund, a new tool that's capable of making a very big difference to the people of Europe.
You know, the more I talk to him, I have, more answers. So, if you don't mind.
Of course.
because I will open up the floor to the Slido questions, and I will not have a second chance. So just another follow-up there. And, my journalistic instincts just kicked in a little bit. So what would you say the response to the pandemic in the Eurozone, has the answer been a European answer mostly, or has it been, a collection of national answers to the challenges?
So it's been a European answer. So I had the privilege of attending the Eurogroup meetings, if privilege is indeed the right word, when we were trying to understand this pandemic, and then when the health impact of this pandemic became clear. And when I think about the European Union, I think about there's been a political project that tries to structure how we engage and how we keep in contact with each other for the political benefit of all of us. So even though I'm only meeting you for the very first time, what the European Union has done for Ireland and for Latvia is draw together all that we have in common, make a strength of how we can be in contact with each other. And we were dealing with a disease that could kill you by contact. So it was an extraordinary challenge and threat to the European Union. And even though we had very difficult days in the early weeks and months of it, fundamentally ministers and prime ministers realized that if we didn't act differently in dealing with this pandemic, it posed an existential challenge to the future of the European Union. And that is why you saw action by our central bank in the ECB. It's why you saw the recovery fund, because we realized that this posed such a massive challenge to the functioning and economic functioning of Europe and the euro area. So it was a European response, and it was needed, and it will work.
So you would argue that in contrast to other previous crises, this one has actually, brought the countries together in a new kind of way.
I mean, I would see them as being completely different.
Yeah.
And Ireland had a particularly harsh and tough experience in the global financial crisis, and very much appreciate the hurt and pain and difficulty and loss that is created by huge economic difficulty. But I see this as being in a very different light and a fundamentally different challenge that may take us a long time to understand the effect of. I think we're probably only in the early phase of understanding the effect of it. But what I think the effect will be is that we saw the governments of Europe and the institutions of Europe say we will stand behind this project and we will invest and we will spend to protect it. And I also think you may begin to see a greater awareness of our European interdependence that in the past was created by a currency, by our ability to travel, by our ability to study, but now that also being enhanced by an awareness of how interdependent our health is with each other.
All right.
And I think that's going to add a very powerful dimension to the European project, presenting both challenges but also opportunities.
All right. This is a fascinating conversation, actually. And there's going to be a lot of work to do to researchers as well as politicians to actually figure out once this is done and over with, hopefully soon, what effect has this had on the process of European integration? And it's very timely to begin that conversation right now. All right, Governor, please. When you look at this year's challenges, what do you see as you know, the most acute, if I could say so? Obviously, the central bank, the central banks, and the European Central Bank is in a bit of a different position here relative to the governments and the finance ministers. So your take might be, a bit from a different angle.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the discussion so far. It's been very interesting, and I fully agree with Paschal's statement that this has been a crisis that has been addressed with a common view. Okay? It's not been a crisis of individual countries. It's been a crisis, and the measures to address it has been on a pan-European level, which is very good in comparison to the previous crisis. So we are gradually getting better. Of course, this has not been done just for the sake of the EU itself. It's for the sake of citizens. And if we take a look at the current crisis, okay, with that deep a shock and drop in economic activity, we've seen that the labor markets have feathered the situation quite nicely. Okay? There's been a common response both from the monetary policy, also from the fiscal policy. And there have been important also structural changes that have happened, and we may discuss that a bit further. But of course, it is not that everything is nice and completed. Okay, COVID is still there. Ups and downs are still there. But it seems that it is gradually waning. Okay, we have the vaccine, and that will help to solve this problem. But in a way, kind of, if in comparison to medical issues, kind of the medical area, I would say it perhaps look a bit like that we have, hopefully very soon, be able to say that we have cured the pneumonia, but the arm is still broken. Okay, so we're back to these same structural issues that we had in the past. Okay? If we talk about a couple of major points going forward for this year, with all due respect that COVID is still around, but the economy is learning to live with it, and the negative impact is smaller with every wave. And what I would say, kind of one of the issues that we have to address is exit from COVID-19. Okay? What we've seen quite an upswing in inflation. Okay? That is an issue to be addressed. And of course, we also see large debt levels. Okay? This will need to be discussed this year, and some of the fundamental changes will need to be built in so that we can look into the future. And the challenges into the future are quite many. One of them is, of course, development of technologies, but of course also the climate issue. We need to invest to address these issues. But then how do we do it if we have large debt levels in specific certain countries? Okay? So the investment and future growth story is, of course, extremely important to be addressed going forward. Because if we don't invest, okay, we will not see productivity growth. And then that will affect, of course, the well-being of the individuals in all our societies. And the third one that I would stress, also, having become extremely acute in the last few months, but has been dormant for quite a while, which is geopolitical issue, okay? And link that with the energy sector. And that is about one of the fundamental issues. How do we go about as well? These are these geopolitical tensions. Okay? It's by no means unipolar world anymore. We want to strengthen European Union and Euro area as a geopolitical player. Okay? And of course also that has an extremely important component in terms of our energy policies. Of course, I've dwelled a lot away from the monetary policy here, but also monetary policy is being exercised in the economic environment, and all these aspects are extremely important. And just to touch upon the last thing in terms of the monetary policy, the response has been massive. And we have supported economies in Euro area and European Union. But of course, monetary policy is not designed and cannot and should not deal with all the problems. We have fiscal policy, we have structural policies, so it's only one element of policy mix. And our major task is price stability. So when we see economy rebounding, when we see that the negative effects of COVID are phasing out, of course we will start to reduce our support. And that means that fiscal and structural policies will become responsible for other elements in much more obvious way than it has been during the crisis.
I think the extremely pertinent point there about the challenges of this year, I would suppose. A number of points that were raised there by the governor. I'll pick on one, and I think one of the questions is also related to that. Let me find it really quickly. I'll introduce this question then, but I'll sort of package it in, I think, in a more contextualize it a bit. So the question is, how would you comment Eurostat flash estimate for December showing the euro area inflation on the new record high of 5%? So I think this feeds in the overall question about, as the governor mentioned, so the central bank responsible for price stability, and how to sort of relate it to the expenditures that the governments have been engaged in over the last few years, and will continue in this manner for a while, which will raise their debt levels. And how do you see that conversation happening between the bankers and the finance ministers there? Isn't that going to be quite a challenge this year?
There will be a need for a very careful discussion and engagement regarding how we deliver the coordination that Governor Kazāks has correctly identified as being really essential. As a Minister for Finance for Ireland and as President of the Eurogroup, we will have that engagement while at all times respecting the independence of the ECB, which is the cornerstone of one of the most intensely important elements of how we have maintained the success of our shared currency. But this is why we have our Eurogroup meetings. We can hear the views from the President of the ECB. Obviously there will be dialogue here at home, here in Latvia, between the government and the central bank, where they hear their assessments regarding where we stand. But if I look at the coordination challenge that is there, in truth, I see it as being a very different kind of challenge as to where we were 18 months ago. I mean, 18 months ago, we all faced an unbelievable difficulty in trying to understand how a global pandemic, could affect the people of Latvia, the people of Ireland, the functioning of the European Union. And I believe we can make the case that our policies have worked in helping our people recover economically from this disease. And while we do have coordination that will need to continue, I do see the level of challenge that we need to manage now as being very different to where we were 18 months ago, and we can do it. And I'm just to give one figure of our success, and I'm quite careful picking a statistic on the performance of the Latvian economy, sitting beside the governor of the Central Bank of Latvia. But if you look at the performance of your economy after the global financial crisis, it took 41 quarters to get back to pre-pandemic levels of output. And I think it has taken around 6 quarters to do it after the pandemic. So that's how our efforts have worked. And yes, we do have challenges, but they are familiar, and we will be able to work together to respond back to them.
All right. The question that has gotten most votes here from the audience is...
It's like the Eurovision, is it?
Actually, there was there's a people were trying to figure out why you're coming here. So, and one of the versions was that you're garnering support for the Irish Eurovision contestant. So
it's a good theory, but it's not the case. It's not the truth.
And 10 points go to Ireland. That's something you'll never hear from Riga, I suppose. But
well, we would still hope for support.
We haven't heard your contestant now.
We'll go for 12.
Yeah. 12, right, correct. Right, so back to the serious business here. The future of the Stability and Growth Pact, what changes you foresee, if any, in this? I mean, this is going to be a question. The rules on budget deficits have been relaxed. It's not going to be an easy task to reestablish the new, going back to the old system or establishing something new. So, if you're looking into your crystal ball, what do you see in relation to the Stability and Growth Pact? We'll begin with Governor here. I don't know whether...
I'm in quite a difficult situation to comment on the details because I'm not a fiscal policymaker, but of course, commenting as a partner in policymaking, which is my position, I think, two issues to stress. One is Stability and Growth Pact. Well, we need to look at this issue, and there is work undergoing. The changes, if they will happen, have to be realistic, doable, and they have to be credible, so that the framework itself is credible. In terms of other details, I will not comment at the moment. But to have an active and productive cooperation among not only discussions, and we have had over the past couple of years, especially during the crisis, a very close discussion and cooperation in terms of helping the economy. But of course, there are some things to be improved, in terms of how do we ensure, and we, not meaning the central bank's responsibility, but how do the governments, how do the countries, how does the European Union itself ensures that sustainability issues, and all these things. And of course, here is unfinished business still there. We have a common currency, we have euro, we have, well, still incomplete banking union, and there are some issues to be done there, for instance, deposit insurance or backstop, and for the resolution mechanisms issues. But there is also, of course, the issue of common fiscal capacity. How does European Union react when the crisis comes? And we've seen some very nice developments over the last couple of years, Next Generation EU, for instance. But we will need, most likely, something similar also for investment story going forward to deal with climate change, with those kind of challenges. But coming back to your original question, I think there are some revisions necessary to make the Stability and Growth Pact more credible and, of course, realistic in terms of enforcement. I'm not going to go further at the moment, but
I'd like to provoke you, obviously, but not going to happen probably. So your perspective on this, what should we expect?
So to go back to your question there regarding what kind of changes likely are possible, I'll be playing a role in the discussions in relation to this. And as president of the Eurogroup, we'll be working with my colleagues in the Euro area to see can we develop a consensus regarding some important elements of this debate. So it's a bit too early from my crystal ball to be able to indicate to me or to you regarding how this debate will develop as the year moves on. However, at this point, I think there are three themes that I could pick as being very important elements of the debate that is underway. The first one is the word that the Governor opened up with, which is the importance of credibility. That our fiscal rules, I believed, did work in the past. Of course, there were challenges. Of course, there were difficulties. But I believe they did work in leading to an improvement, on average, on the quality of public finances in the euro area. And that really mattered when this pandemic arrived. And as the Governor has said, it will be very important that when we conclude this debate, we conclude with a credible view regarding how they continue to operate. The second one is the impact of debt. The indebtedness of the euro area on average has increased, and it has increased purely because of a pandemic, as opposed to the more familiar economic policy choices that governments sometimes make that can lead to an acceleration of indebtedness. And clearly, when we are thinking about the future, the issue of debt sustainability will be more important because much of what we are doing is creating emergency tools to deal with a health emergency that we hope is improving. But when we get beyond the point of this health emergency, the issue of how we manage our debt and its sustainability will become an issue that will be even more important. And then the final one for me, and I speak here as a politician, as a TD, a Teachta Dála, will be about the need to continue to maintain political support for the rules that we have in place, to make the case for these rules as to why they worked in the past, why they can work in the future, and to be always aware of the need for the political legitimacy of the agreements that we have in place that underpin the functioning of the euro. And that's something I'm always very aware of as an elected politician and as a member of the Eurogroup.
I see here on Slido, thank you very much, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, for keeping the questions coming, and they build on sort of some earlier points that both of you mentioned. So I'm struggling to keep this as structured as I possibly can, but jumping from issues to issues. But the one point I wanted to pick on that the Governor raised earlier, I think he had the comparison of we've gotten rid of the pneumonia, but the hand is still broken. Was that the analogy, right? So about the fundamental challenges to the Eurozone, that we have one monetary policy and still 19 fiscal policies, that has always been mentioned as the great challenge of the common currency area and future for that. So, and the Governor mentioned that there are some fiscal tools that have been developed, but do you foresee sort of, further movement into that direction, sort of, particularly as one question here also deals with, is there not a potential contradiction from Andris Šuvajos? Is there not a potential contradiction between the potential imperative to reduce debt and deficits and increase national green investment? So I think it does relate to this, that perhaps such programs need to be there. Increasingly, there are some already, but perhaps even more so. So I'm, putting quite a few things in one question, and you can build upon, whichever you think is more useful in this context. But about this main challenge that has always been there for the euro currency, right? So do you see any movement in the direction this year or the next year on overcoming these, or at least minimizing?
But we've already made such progress. I mean, we've made such progress through the foundation of a recovery fund, which is a multi-year, over 600 billion euro economic instrument that will be with us for years to come. And if you look at it's a terrible word to describe a technical word to describe a terrible prospect, which is when we talk about fragmentation risks to the euro area, that the euro could come under such pressure that it's not able to function normally. And in anticipation of really big challenges, the governments of the euro area, of the European Union more broadly, put in place a fund that would try to help economies recover in a way that narrows the gap between them as opposed to widening the gap. And this is an incredibly important political statement, not just an economic strategy. For now, I think all our energies will go into implementing that. And I will go back to the very early part of your statement where you talked about 19 different fiscal policies. I'm not sure I would describe that as always being a weakness. As the governor at the very start of our interview talked about the need for fiscal policy to do things that monetary policy can't. And fiscal policy has the ability to vary depending on the national economic environment that it is in. Mm-hmm. So as long as you have national fiscal policies all operating within certain parameters, which is the reason why your fiscal rule question is so important, I believe it is absolutely economically viable to see areas of difference, country by country, regarding the execution of budgetary policy, as long as that difference is inside certain parameters. And that is why the debate on economic governance will be very important regarding the future of that. But while there are many challenges ahead, I do believe we can look ahead with a degree of optimism regarding our ability to grow.
All right. Is there anything to add to that, please? Yeah.
I just want to add one aspect. It's not only about the deficit, as the president of the Eurogroup very clearly argued for. It's of course not only about the deficit or the debt. It's also about the structure, structural policy. Where do the governments invest, or how is the money being spent? So even if in some cases we may have a view that, okay, these investments need more funding, and that's why there perhaps may be need to run somewhat higher deficits, it is not always necessarily the case. Because the structural issues, removing specific barriers to growth, to productivity, or kind of rearranging the structure of the current investments and spending, can open up many more possibilities for growth, even without increasing the debt or running deficits. Okay? It's not always more money. It's also the way how the money is being invested and spent. So only the efficient mix of all these three policies, such as fiscal, structural, and monetary, can provide a sustainable answer to these challenges. Okay? It's not only in the realm of one of the policies, it's the mix of them. And that's why, for instance, as for the monetary policy, I was very happy to hear the view that, of course, monetary policy has to be independent. And that is, in my view, crucial to have an effective policy mix. Okay? So.
Governor, a quick follow-up, particularly to you. Any further views on energy price volatility as a risk for euro area this year and beyond? For example, weather in geopolitics. So that was the question.
Of course, we can start it from home here in Latvia, and we, of course, take a European perspective, and the issue is all the same. The climate change, and there are two elements. One is operational at the current moment, the lack of gas supply during the winter. Okay? Some of this most likely linked to geopolitical issues. Okay? Some of this linked to the choice of certain European countries to go for specific energy segments. Okay? For instance, Germany is saying no to nuclear. Okay? And all these kind of things. That is one element. But another element is, of course, to tackle and address the climate change and issues, we will need to be very aware of what are the implications for energy demand and energy sources. Okay? And this is, of course, out of the monetary policy decision-making, but it does affect monetary policy through prices. And what we see at the current moment that the prices are extremely volatile, okay? And they are, in many cases, at historic highs, like gas price. Okay? This needs to be addressed also to provide answers as to the energy prices, as to the living standards of the societies. Okay? The way the fiscal part of the equation will address how do we get the CO2 price reflecting its externalities, okay, or the true cost to the society, for instance, through pollution, okay, will of course affect the energy price. And then monetary policy will take it as given. Either we look through it, or we kind of try to reduce this negative impact. So this very clearly shows that all the policies are very intimately interlinked, but they have to remain independent so that the decisions are being made on a sustainable footing, okay, that they can last, rather than be jumpy from one event to another event.
All right, dear friends, we still have time for a couple questions, so please log on to Slido and get them over here. One of the questions builds on your comment in a speech last summer, where you said that there's still, well, the RRF is going to be an undeniable booster for the economies most affected by the pandemic, but there's still a lot of uncertainty and risk of long-term economic scarring. So in terms of long-term economic scarring, what do you see as sort of the most sort of sensitive, sectors of the economy, or I don't know, sectors of population that we will see as being, permanently affected by what we have experienced during the pandemic? So, if you could give us.
So I'd pick out two parts, two very important risks that have developed as a result of this pandemic. The first one is, again, economics and economic policy frequently comes up with terrible descriptions of really important things. And we now talk about, labour-intensive parts of our economy, or contact-based parts of our economy, and referring to really important parts of our society and our economy here in Latvia, back home in Ireland, like tourism, hospitality, parts of our economy that employ a lot of people, that are really, really important to our societies. And there clearly is a risk regarding what those sectors will look like, how many people they will employ, what is the demand that will be there for the really important service that they supply. It's early. I'm afraid I think it's still too early to figure out how our attitudes to travel, to being in a restaurant, to being in a cafe may change. But these are really important parts of our economy to which there is a risk. And how we can support them in an effective way, while also looking then at how we can move to other and support other parts of our economy that will perform, that will grow quicker in the future, is a real policy challenge. Primarily for fiscal policy, because I want to recognise and agree again with what the Governor said earlier on. Fiscal policy, structural policy about education, about training. It's the responsibility of those policy areas to respond back to this. So that would be number one. And then number two, the impact of this disease on women and very young people within our economy, I think is, again, a really, really big risk. How many of our young students have missed time in college, have missed time in school, have missed time, are young infants who've missed time at the very start of their education. The impact on their development and their living standards and their life prospects is something that we have to be really aware of. And then alongside that, and as importantly, the effect that this pandemic could have had on the participation of women, the kind of careers they have, the length of their careers, the role they have played in our society. Again, really important area that I think we are again, have to be aware is at risk, and have to look at how these things develop, particularly across 2022, as I hope the risk of this pandemic begins to diminish.
In a moment, is the main task of recognizing this and providing some answers to that, is that something that can be addressed on the Eurogroup level in certain respects, or does it sound mostly as the responsibility on the national level?
Well, in terms of the policy choices about it, I think it's a really good example of how the fusion between European choices and national choices is becoming more deep over time. So to directly answer your question, is this a competence for the president of the Eurogroup or for the Eurogroup itself? Clearly not. It is a competence for the finance minister of Latvia, for Yanis, for the government of Latvia. But where the role of the Eurogroup and the European institutions and the Euro institutions are then, is to try to create an appropriate economic environment within the European Union in which these national and social goals can be progressed, in which we can make progress. So the competences for much of this sit at national level, but at the heart of the European project is the idea that if we act collectively, we can achieve more collectively than we can on our own. So as Latvia makes progress on these priorities, it indirectly enriches the ability of Ireland to do it. And I believe that is the case. And as we can make progress on these things, it helps with the ability of others to make progress. And that is where the kind of contemporary rationale, the role of Europe, I believe, is to be found.
Governor, your take on the very important issue of long-term effects on this in different segments and perhaps instruments of how to address that.
I think one major conclusion is that because of this common and very forceful response, we will see that those scarring effects are smaller than we were at the beginning afraid of.
Yeah.
Okay? So that is by all means an important takeaway. We are doing much better than we could have. Mm-hmm. Okay? But it does not mean that everything is fun. Mm-hmm. Okay? Nice and rosy. And this crisis has, so there is things to be kind of improved. And this crisis has very much acted as a time machine, as a catalyst, bringing the future closer to us than we in the past were thinking in terms of the time requirement. Mm-hmm. And in fact, unfortunately, the good news and the bad news at the same time is that the future is now. The future is here, and we will never go back to the situation of pre-COVID-19 economic structure. Incentives have changed, opportunities have changed, technologies have been used much more wider in different areas, which will never be eradicated and kind of thrown away, and we will never come back to exactly the same situation as at the end of 2019 or early 2020. Mm-hmm. Okay? And I will just stress two things. One is digitalization. We see that that's a powerful driver for growth. Mm-hmm. And the second one is underinvestment in many areas, starting with the infrastructure and ending with soft skills, such as education. And here I'm talking about Latvia in particular. Education, long kind of life learning, reskilling, upskilling, and all these things. So what risk do we see at the current moment? We see in the Latvian case, but that is also, one can draw parallels in other countries. Yeah. One is with respect to genders, the other one, of course, in terms of the age groups, youngsters not being able to get into the labor market and all these things. But by and large, the risk is two-speed labor market, where we see people with adequate skills seeing their incomes growing, and they can participate. But because of this very fast change in using technologies, okay, we see that part of the society risks to be dropping out. Okay? And that means that those people will not see income growth, they may even see job destruction and never being able to get back to decent income levels. Okay? So this is again an issue of structural policies, active labor market policies, upskilling, reskilling, education, whatever. That makes the situation much better for those at the lower pay scale, okay, with least kind of valuable skills, so that they can participate in this story of economic growth. Okay.
Yeah.
Governor, two quick questions from the audience to you. I'll put them together. The ECB is seen as more dovish on monetary policy compared to the Fed or the Bank of England. I'm trying to read from your body language whether you appreciate this question or not.
That's a very good question. I'm happy to answer it.
And in face of high inflation, what are the main drivers of this difference? And the second question is related to this, but more specific. How long will central banks be able to look through higher energy prices before they have to act? Could you cover?
Let me
2
keep
minutes.
on with the first one.
Yeah.
I'm not going to take that much. Why are there differences between the ECB's and Fed's policies? Because there are different stages of business cycle. Okay.
Different stages of what?
Business cycle.
Oh, sure.
The US economy is much more mature in its business cycle. And that's why the Fed is reacting earlier, if I may say so, in terms of calendar, but not because of the business cycle kind of a calendar. They are simply much more advanced in economic recovery. Okay? And do not doubt that ECB will react when we will see it necessary. In fact, the December decision already shows that we have decided to stop PEP, pandemic program, okay, at the end of this quarter. Okay, so we are reducing support to the economy. But the business cycle is not that advanced for us to do it now. Okay? Different economies, different timing of policies. But when we will see that we are at our target, over medium term 2%, then of course we will react accordingly. And with the current dynamics of inflation, it seems that this is a fairly likely possibility that we will reach this target. Okay? That means that if our forecast, which we will have again in March and June, if we will see it necessary, we will act. Okay? And that is coming back to the very early intervention that I had today, is that monetary support has been very important for the economy to survive this crisis, but it will not go on forever. We will start reducing it, rates will go up, and fiscal policy has to take note of that. The second one, as to inflation, of course, we follow inflation extremely carefully, and when we will see that we are credibly at our target, 2% medium term, then of course we will act. Okay? We are flexible in our decisions, we are data-driven, okay? And we can change our view at any monetary policy meeting, which takes place every 6 weeks.
All right. All right, gentlemen, we've got 5 minutes left. So my concluding question, and it's related to the fact that it's January 2022, which marks 20 years since the introduction of euro as a fully fledged currency. It's been a while since the last avalanche of articles about the inevitable collapse of the euro currency, right? Whenever a crisis comes, we have that avalanche coming. Another crisis of some sort will come, because that's just the nature of economy and economics and politics and life in general. So what is your assessment of, quite briefly, of that path we've followed over the last 20 years with this currency? I got the impression that this crisis has actually been a relatively, in that sense, a good crisis, because it has strengthened the community rather than weakened it compared to other crises. But I'll give you the final word because you're the guest of honor here. The governor has the first take on sort of summing up the very easy task of summing up the 20 years of the common currency. You've got 15 seconds. Please, if you can.
I will not only answer about the euro area, because Latvia is part of the euro area only since 2014. I will take a wider view about the European Union as well. We are part of since 2004. And on the Latvian side, I think it's been of massive benefit to be part of European Union and euro area. By all means, okay, it has opened up so many possibilities. So many possibilities. And take a look at very very simple example of crisis of 2008 and crisis of 2020. If at that time we had no possibility to borrow and the fiscal adjustment had to be extremely painful, okay, now it's a very different story. Okay. As for the euro area, again, in my view, a story of success. Okay. Price stability has been there. Okay. We have seen much closer integration and many more opportunities being opened up during the euro area membership rather than kind of being without it. So I think it is a success, but of course this is not the end of history. And let me start with Latvian situation as well. We have joined euro area, which is a fantastic story, lots of opportunities for us, but at the same time, we very clearly have to understand that this is not about some alien project or some decision-making body that is up there who mystically takes decisions. No, it is about us. We are Europe and we are euro area. We should be part of decision-making, of making the future much more success than in the past. So, successful Europe, successful European Union, successful euro area is successful Latvia. So we have to be involved in discussions, in decision-making on an equal footing. It is about us. It's not alien kind of decision-makers that enforce something onto Latvia. No, it is about us. We are part of Europe. So far it's been success. Let's make it even a bigger success going forward.
All right. That sounded like a concluding speech. That was a good one, huh?
Yeah, so I'm going to try and build upon it and make the observation that while it is the first time that myself and your governor have met, I think a lot of viewers would look at the way we've tried to answer your question. And I hope that they would see that there's a common view between the two of us on the really big opportunities and challenges that we are facing together. And I believe the reason that common view has developed is because of how the European Union and our institutions, which they are the institutions of the people of Europe, have allowed the development of that common view. And the governor talked about, over 20 years. I'll even take a time frame before that and say that if our predecessors had met 50 years ago, it is obvious that our views, our understandings of our national prospects and Europe would have been completely different 50 years ago to the common view that we have now. And I think that journey, which the euro has played a big political role in, is an essential journey for how we navigate a world that's changing very, very quickly, and how we protect and how we secure a way of living and views that we have in our part of the world that ultimately, I believe, are good for the people of Latvia and good for the people of Ireland. So what will that journey look like for the next 20 years? I think there is a generational opportunity for Europe to lead the way in a transition to a lower carbon future, and for the euro to really benefit from that. Clearly, and this is work that our central bank and our commission are engaging in at the moment, the digital future of the euro is a massive project that we're all thinking through really carefully. It's huge, because we can see so many technological developments that have changed how we pay each other, how we define value, and how that's changed so quickly. But at the heart of us will be the way the governor summed it up. It's about how we have a political project that we need to make the case for, that can deliver living standards, that can deliver political prospects that are far better than we can achieve if we were trying to do it on our own. And we do that in a common way, while always respecting that the differences that we have are genuine, and even in the very long run can be sources of diversity in the European project, which is good for all of us. So many challenges ahead, a huge number, and let's not pretend the last 20 years have always been easy either, but they haven't. But we've got to a better place because of our shared efforts than we would have on our own, and that we can continue to do that in the next 20 years to come.
Mr. Donohoe, Mr. Kazāks, thank you very much for this hour. This was quite amazing. Still, I don't know whether we had any audience, but you know, I enjoyed it tremendously.
There were questions.
Yeah, there were questions, so at least 6. So thank you very much. I think this was a very enlightening conversation, and I was pleased to moderate. And thank you very much for joining, for tuning in, whether you did it in a live version or you'll watch it later. Gentlemen,
Thank you.
thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
All right.